Hi, welcome to Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. This is episode number 29. My name is George Ortega, and I'm recording this on August 16th at 8:47 p.m. Eastern Time. So let's begin. Most fundamentally, this pandemic is a moral issue. And it plays itself out as a moral issue, I believe, within the arena of economics. Basically, our factory farming system, that's 99% of the farmed animals in the United States, is the breeding ground for future pandemics that we need to prevent. And the reason we have these factory farms is because we are attempting to pay much less for our meat, fish, dairy, eggs. And so the answer to the moral answer, or how it plays out to this pandemic, also is economic. As I've been mentioning over the last 28 episodes, there's a new industry that began in 2013 called cellular agriculture. I mean, it had its first proof of concept that essentially we don't need to farm animals either in factory farms or in family farms to have as much meat, dairy, eggs as we like. We can basically take a biopsy, a tiny amount of cells from an animal. It's a painless procedure, and basically deceive them into believing they're still in the animal's body, and then coax them through various means of the technology to replicate, to multiply, to do what cells do. And in that way, we can eat lobster without any cruelty, pork without any cruelty, cattle, chicken without any cruelty. But relative to this pandemic, this is important because this industry can allow us to shut down the factory farms that represent the risk to us. I mean, many people understand that this current coronavirus began in Wuhan, China, not in a factory farm, in a wet market. But what needs to be understood is that it's the distinction between a wet market and a factory farm is irrelevant. It's basically the commonality, what they both engender, that represents false dichotomy to separate one from the other, is that they both involve extremely unsanitary conditions and extremely cruel conditions. But for the purpose of of understanding how they cause pandemics, it's extremely unsanitary. I mean, like, again, with factory farming, tens of thousands of chickens, broiler chickens, in an airplane hangar, or a shed the size of a football field, okay? And they're crammed together, though. And they're living there for 7 weeks, and nobody cleans up the place daily. For 7 weeks, they are living in their urine and their feces, and pumped full of antibiotics because the conditions there are so unsanitary. And needless to say, they endure unconscionable suffering. Imagine. So, all right. So we have this new technology, because I mean, the other answer, which is a better answer than cellular agriculture, really, I think, is for us as a species, as a humanity, as a global population, to transition from eating animal products to a completely vegan diet, plant-based, which in so many ways is so healthier, so much healthier. So that is the ideal, but I think in this world, while we're reaching toward the ideal, we also have to address what is realistic, what we can realistically expect. So getting back to the factory farming, right now there are about 40 or 50 startups that are basically racing to meet certain technological challenges, research challenges that are involved in scaling production. In other words, they can grow lobster and turkey and beef and pork and milk and eggs in labs. But that's one thing. It's another thing to grow them at scale, and also to grow them in a medium that's not very expensive, so that they compete. They can compete with the animal-derived meat, fish, and dairy products we have in supermarkets today. All right, the problem there is that you know, these 40, 50 companies have cumulatively amassed about $1.5 billion in research funding, which is great. So like, but the problem with that is that with that level of investment, you know, industry insiders, a lot of these CEOs, there's organizations that have been created to help expand and develop this industry. Basically, many say, well, you know, we may have to wait 10 or 15 years for these products to be in supermarkets, you know, en masse, to, you know, in substantial numbers, that they make a difference, that they, you know, lead to the shutting down of these factory farms, which is, of course, the purpose. And so we get back to the money and the morality. So our moral solution is to fast track that research, to not come out of this current pandemic, all of us living in dread of the next pandemic, or worse than that, experiencing the next pandemic. In the 1980s, I believe there were 4 major outbreaks, you know, epidemics, pandemics. In the 1990s, there were another 4. In the 2000s, there's a lot, you know, there's over 10. And I say this to say that basically our world is, for various reasons, the greater population, greater air travel. There's about 4 billion passenger flights, you know, that go throughout the world each year, and each of those flights is carrying what, 100, 200 people, perhaps less sometimes, but that's a huge number of, you know. And so what happens, like, you know, when a person gets, as we've noticed with coronavirus, a person gets a virus in China, all of a sudden it's in the United States, all of a sudden it's everywhere in the world. And again, the more people, the more flights, the greater the risk. So these pandemics are a far greater risk, generally speaking, now than they were in the 50s and 60s, because there wasn't as much factory farming back then, and because there wasn't as much air travel. Also because there wasn't as much deforestation, which is another major contributor. All right, so again, the other solution that I've been talking about, and will continue to talk about because it's an important solution also, is to develop vaccines against the coronavirus, universal vaccines against all strains of coronavirus, against all strains of influenza, It's a lot harder with bacteria because there's so many good bacteria. But ideally, I suppose it's theoretically possible to create vaccines against the harmful bacteria that do not attack the beneficial ones. I mean, but as you might imagine, especially with bacterial vaccines, the success with this research is probably 10, 15 years away because it's such a difficult challenge. This challenge of growing meat and fish and dairy in labs in sufficient quantities, in bioreactors, these huge, I guess, fermenters. Basically, it's kind of like it's a fermentation process, apparently, or similar to it. That's a much easier challenge, I believe. I mean, it's not like I know the science really, but I'm not a biologist. But from what I hear the people in this industry say, and also epidemiologists, many epidemiologists say that no, these universal vaccines are not possible. So, all right, so this is a moral situation we're in, and so let's shift from facing the problem to considering the opportunity of this, to reframe this from, yes, we need to do this. We need to end factory farming, family farming. We need to stop eating meat and fish and dairy that are grown from animals if we're going to be free from pandemics. That's the bottom line. That's, again, and one last thing about the financial aspects before I get more into the morality and perhaps a different direction of how we can create a better world, much better world. What I've been asking for in this series is for $50 billion to be released immediately. Not next year, not the year after. I mean, like, it's not going to happen with Trump in office, but as soon as Biden gets inaugurated, what is it, January 20th or something like that. Release those funds immediately. Get an army of bio-researchers, an army of young kids, an army of really, really bright minds. Throw money at them, because this is that important. So like $50 billion to fast track, to sufficiently fund this industry. So that instead of having to wait 10, 15, maybe 20 years for these products to be in supermarkets, they very reasonably could be in supermarkets in 2-3 years. And I say very reasonably because, like, the time frame for developing a vaccine is generally 10 years, 15, 20 years. We don't even have one for AIDS yet, and that was in the 80s. But they're fast tracking the coronavirus, so we may have one in a year or two. So if we can do this for vaccines, we can, I believe the industrial cellular agriculture challenges, biological challenges, are far less complicated. All right, so now, we're considering the problem, the solution, and we see that it's a moral problem, an economic problem. Of course, the moral problem is like, some of us, and this is mainly the Republican Party, but, Democrats also, there's a lot of moderate Democrats who aren't really as progressive as they're lead to believe. They don't want to fund this. They would, and the Congressional Budget Office in May estimated that this coronavirus was going to cost us $8 trillion when all is said and done. So what this $50 billion represents is 1% of that. So if we as the American people, pretty much we as a humanity, are too stupid, I believe, too indifferent, cheap, I don't know how to describe this, but if we don't do this, reckless, careless, brazen, if we don't make this investment, you know, from a moral perspective, you know, I'm not sure we have that much of a claim that we deserve to exist, continue existing as a species. You know, God has a way of culling our numbers. In the 1918 pandemic killed 100 to 50 to 100 million people. And you know, there could be greater, again, and that was in 1918 with such a smaller population. So that, you know, the equivalent of a pandemic like that today would probably kill what, 400 million people, 500 million, you know, perhaps more. So, all right, so that's the morality. So let's look at the other side. You know, let's say we recognize the threat and we recognize that there is a means to essentially create a pandemic-free future. And we get involved. We talk to our friends and family about this. We learn about it. We you know, do some research. There's some videos out there on, you know, there's videos out on cellular agriculture that are like 2 minutes long, 5 minutes long, 15 minutes long, an hour long. You know, there's a lot of different kinds of presentations, and there's a lot of articles on this also. And there's the websites, of course, of the startups. There's also New Harvest is the primary organization funding cellular agriculture. And then there's another one called the Good Food Institute that works with both plant-based and clean meat and cultured meat products, you know, to advance the field. So imagine we do this. Imagine we do this. We summon the will, the wisdom, the responsibility to lay aside our indifference, to just like to act, to not, you know, to not just be complacent, not just do nothing. You know, a friend of mine was reminding me recently, you know, that all that the world needs for evil to prevail is for good people, good men to stand by and do nothing. You know, that's so true. And so, but let's say we do. Let's say we invest this $50 billion. Let's say it starts being released in March of 2021. And then I would imagine by 2022, you know, you have many, many brilliant minds entering this field, biologists, young kids, you know, professionals, and you have advances, you know. Let's say they've gone through $4 or $5 billion of that money by that time, or 10 billion, you know, 20, whatever. They can, you know, they can reveal to us this success. And then in a couple of years, you know, they have basically, you know, that $50 billion would also attract a lot more private investment behind it. You know, people who are investing in these companies to make money, you know, shares of the companies. So this might be, there might be another $200 billion being spent, you know, aside from the initial 50. And so, yeah, in 3 years, all of a sudden we have these factories, these clean meat factories, cellular agriculture factories all over, not just the United States, but throughout the world. Because this, you know, part of these $50 billion should, of course, be sent to other countries, you know, some developing countries that, you know, they have bright minds too. They might just figure out far less expensive solutions because their mindset might be much more amenable to that because of their circumstances. And so, yeah, so like we find ourselves in a world where 3 years from now, you know, we've got the factories and we're manufacturing, and then all of a sudden there's absolutely no good reason to not shut down these factory farms. Now, yes, I mean, like people are going to lose their jobs. Just like, for example, there was a horse trade in New York City until, you know, Ford developed Model T, the first car, and many people lost their jobs. With farming, many farmers lost their jobs. Throughout history, there's been many displacements of people, you know, working on something, whale oil, who, you know, whale oil is not used anymore. Very few, you know, people hunting whales in that way. So like, there are many industries where, you know, the best thing, the greatest good for the greatest number does involve, you know, shutting down an industry, especially an industry as dangerous as factory farming. And so yeah, and then part of this money, again, maybe it should be, I mean, like 50 billion. I mean, again, we've already spent what, about 2-3 trillion on this pandemic, and we're anticipated to spend 8 trillion. So I mean, like, you know, it seems like 1/2% is way too little, you know. So because I mean, because like part of this money could be used not, you know, for the research challenges, but to retrain people who were in the meat industry, you know, who were raising cattle and chickens and all, retrain them, you know, employ them in other areas, find jobs for them. And this is going to be, again, the centerpiece of the Biden administration, you know, for the next 4 years. And so, but just, you know, in the Manhattan Project that created the first nuclear bomb in 1945, they used to end World War II, I think there were about 130,000 people, you know, involved in that project. It was just the United States, I believe. I don't believe other countries were trusted to take part in that. But imagine this revolution of ending factory farming, ending a factory farm system that is not only from a scientific sense causing these pandemics, but from a theological, moral sense, is probably inviting God's wrath. It's probably, you know, creating so much more pain and suffering for human beings in the form of punishment for this cruelty that we're inflicting upon these animals. So again, 3 years from now, you know, we shut down the factory farm system, and we've got these products, you know, entering markets, and people are discovering not only do they taste better than the products, you know, the animal-derived products they were eating, but they're actually much healthier for them. They could make these products without cholesterol, without the saturated fats, you know, because they can basically, it's not genetically modify them, but they can genetically engineer them. They can basically, you know, feed them materials that don't lead to these really harmful substances. So like, you know, these products would also be very healthy for us as human beings. But that would do is that would kind of like, that would be an awakening of our conscience. I mean, like, it is, I've talked about this before, it's beyond horrible that we can do this to 70 billion farm animals, you know, land animals every year. But imagine a world that, just like we ended slavery, we abolish factory farming, the farming of animals. I imagine in this world with the internet, and they didn't have this in 1865, but here now with the internet, this would create a burst of moral positivity, a burst of optimism, of enthusiasm to do more. You know, and so much more needs to be done, you know, with climate change. You know, we can probably, as a result of succeeding with this, and this isn't, you know, many people don't realize that the livestock industry is responsible for about 14% of the global greenhouse gas emissions that are responsible for climate change, and the man-made ones. And so by transitioning from factory farming to these lab-based meats, we can reduce that by as much as 90%, you know, even more, I think. So So imagine, I mean, we have to start thinking big. That's our problem, in terms of, the Republicans think big, let's build this wall. Let's just like abolish everything. Just put everybody in prison. they think big. And I mean, like, I do have to agree with them about abortion though. I think that's the liberal Achilles heel. I mean, I don't think it's a liberal position, actually. I think it's a moderate position, but my point is that the progressive movement, the movement to basically, safeguard our way of living, to defend us against climate change, against these emerging threats like antibiotic resistance and pandemics, and these other threats that our current system has been ignoring because people don't want to pay for it, and the Republicans are the main obstructors in that. They just like, it's clueless how greatly they disrespect science. They don't understand it. They're not an intelligent, they're devious, they're shrewd, the way they conduct their campaigns, they're very manipulative and shrewd in those ways. But in terms of like this intelligence that's on a higher level than that, just base kind of like, moralless intelligence, morality-less intelligence, the Republicans have a real problem with that in general. So anyway, we can evolve beyond that. Just like slavery is no longer permissible, factory farming would be no longer permissible, and we can do so much more than that. We can probably get money out of politics, because that's the main driver. It's the money in politics that is not allowing us to spend those $50 billion. All right. Well, I hope you're having a good Monday. Check this out every Monday through Friday on White Plains Community Media, channel 76 if you get Optimum, Cablevision, or 45 if you get Verizon. And the previous episodes are all on YouTube. And so again, like, my challenge, your challenge is to don't just, absorb this and do nothing, learn more. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. If you know people in power, journalists, politicians, talk to them, get them to understand this. My job is going to be, I think, after 29 episodes, to continue trying to frame this more and more positively, not, move away from like, if we don't do this, we are so doomed, to like, we do this and we have a much better world. Okay, thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.